thanks you guys for coming. I have done the paperwork classes here for the last couple years, and I'm going to say passionate about it, right? Because I just really want you to do your job. If I really think about what real estate agents do, the most important thing that I think we do in our jobs is to know what's in the paperwork, because we're being hired and trusted to represent our clients. And if we're not explaining what's in the paperwork correctly, we're not doing our job, right? Because a lot of them aren't reading these papers, right? They're just assuming that how you're explaining it and what's in here is what's in here. And then we say, sign here, right? And when they sign, they're believing what you've told them. And all is probably fine and good until there's a problem, right? And if you find yourself in some arbitration or ethics hearing and your client is saying, that's not what my agent told me this was when I signed it, odds are, and Jim can probably speak to this since he's been on the ethics board and involved in hearings for many, many years, that the onus really falls back on us. I mean, we're going to be the ones that probably don't get the easy end of that, right? We're going to probably be held to a higher standard than the buyer being responsible for reading everything that they're signing, right? Can you speak to that, Jim, at all?
Yeah. The sharks, they're the guppies.
Exactly. So we want to know what we're doing, right? So today I've done classes on all the buyer paperwork, and we're trying to cram everything in, and it's just so hard, and we only have an hour. So my focus today is really just agency and then the buyer rep agreement, and wanting you guys to really know what these say. And when you're sitting down with the buyer, to make sure that you are explaining the things that really are important to be explained, and for that buyer to know what they're getting into when they sign this, okay? So when do you have your buyer sign the agency disclosure?
First contact.
At first, they used to use the word substantive contact, but nobody can say substantive, right? So we say early in any relationship, when you are discussing with a buyer or seller price, terms, and motivation for wanting to buy or sell, that's when that agency disclosure should be presented, okay? And so when I teach my buyer agent how to present this, I'm sure we all do it in a different way, right? There should be a very comfortable flow to this. You should know what each paragraph states so that you can not have to read it to them, not have to look down. I want you to know these forms so well that you can make eye contact as you're explaining it, because when you're confident and comfortable, they're going to be confident and comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. You look nervous and you don't look like you know what you're talking about, they're going to start to feel a little nervous, and maybe you may not get them to sign the buyer rep contract, right? But if you're comfortable and confident, odds are you're going to get everything signed that you want signed that day. Okay, so agency disclosure, what is our default position when we're first meeting with somebody and they have not hired us yet? What's our default position for the state of Minnesota?
Facilitator, or is it?
It is. Facilitator is that's where we stand until they hire us, right? So what does facilitator mean?
You do everything minus representing them. So you owe them all fiduciary duties minus that's what I thought, minus confidentiality, but I thought there was one more too. Maybe it was just minus that one.
Okay. That is wrong.
Okay.
You owe them none of the fiduciary other than confidentiality. Okay. So that's the benefit, right? Of why would you hire me? Well, because my default position right now, per the state of Minnesota, is a facilitator, which means, yes, I can open the doors for you and get you in the house, Mr. Buyer. I can give you MLS data or factual data about the property, but I cannot advise you in any way or act on your behalf in any way. Okay, so you do not get the value of my 25 years of experience in this business. And I don't owe you any of these fiduciary responsibilities. okay? So when you guys are presenting this form, I want you to make it hurt, right? When you're saying, and this is, I'll tell you, this is how I explain it. I have the 2 pages and I actually have them separated. And when I present this form, I say, we're gonna start on page 2 first because it's a little easier. So today, you have not hired me. So right now, per the state of Minnesota, I am required to act as a facilitator only. That means I can open the doors, I can give you data about the property or the neighborhood, but I cannot advise you in any way, shape, or form, which means I can't give you all the knowledge and expertise that I've had over the last 25 years until you hire me. Okay, I cannot act as your representative. Okay? When you hire me, so we're gonna do those embedded commands, right? When you hire me, now I flip over, I will become your buyer's broker, or Keller Williams will become your buyer's broker, okay? What that means, Mr. Buyer, is now I can give you everything that I know, all my knowledge, all my expertise. I will look out for you and your best interests at all times, represent you, get you your house, and negotiate to get you the best terms on that property, okay? So make it hurt as a facilitator, make it a real win for them to hire you. That's why they need you, right? And I will owe you all of these fiduciary responsibilities listed right here. And then you want to go through those fiduciary responsibilities. Now, who knows the fiduciaries without looking? What are they?
Oh gosh. Accounting,
Okay,
loyalty was one. Reasonable care,
okay.
Obedience.
Obedient.
confidentiality.
Yep.
Take the dog.
Which ones are we going through?
We've missed loyalty, disclosure. Otherwise, I think we got the rest of them. So yes, loyalty. I'm going to be loyal to what you want me to do, right, at all times. Act in your best interest. I'm going to be obedient to what you want me to do as long as it's within the scope of the law. Can't break the law for you, as much as that sounds like it could be a lot of fun. Can't do it. Disclosure. I, by law, will disclose to you all material facts that I know about the property that you're interested in purchasing and or the neighborhood, or anything that could affect your use and enjoyment of the property, okay? Confidentiality, obviously, will protect your confidential information at all times. I will use reasonable care to carry out all of my duties throughout this transaction. And the last is accounting. I will not only go over the numbers of this transaction with you, but I will be accountable to the timelines, making sure that we're meeting the inspection timeline, getting everything to the parties that need to get those things so that we get to the closing table on time with no issues. Okay, so that's the way I explain it. You guys can obviously do your own scripts, but that's just how I do it. So I now, as your buyer's broker, owe you all of those fiduciary responsibilities, okay? So now, Mr. Buyer, you've hired me, we are out looking at houses, and we go into a home that is listed by Keller Williams Premier Realty, and you love it, and now you want to buy it, right? We now are going to find ourselves in what's called a dual agency situation. And so how do you guys explain dual agency? How would you explain it to your buyer?
I would say that it would be. No, that's a good question. I haven't quite got there yet.
Okay, that's fair. Jim, how do you explain dual agency?
I just say that unless you agree to dual agency, I can't show you any of the houses we have listed with Keller Williams.
Okay,
I can't represent you if you're looking at a Keller Williams house.
okay.
Um,
But you still haven't told me what dual agency is.
Dual
So,
agency, I represent both sides. I
Okay.
have to be very careful how I represent a buyer and a seller when they're listed by our company or
okay,
myself. If you want to look at one of my listings, and I will be truthful and honest, I will not work one party against the other.
Mhm.
And I will just be a neutral party between. We'll handle all the negotiations to the best of my ability. I can't work one side against the other.
okay,
And I also can't disclose anything that's confidential for either side.
Right.
Unless they want me to tell you.
okay, good. So Jim brought up some really key points, right? And I'm gonna encourage you guys that if you haven't yet done this, especially as a newer agent, take this form, read each paragraph and write down a 1 or 2 sentence, very accurate, but simple to understand description of what that paragraph means. Because there's a lot of legalese right here. But the key things that Jim brought up that I liked was, number 1, we need written consent for a buyer to be put in a dual agency situation, right? They have to agree to be in dual agency. And on our buyer rep form, that's one of the things that's on there that they will actually sign, right? Saying they're either okay or they're not okay. So that's number 1. Number 2, I really want you guys to get used to using the frame or the phrase limited representation, because that's really what it is. If I'm your buyer's broker, you get full 100% representation, right? If we find ourselves in dual agency, now you get limited representation, because I can no longer fight for one side to the detriment of the other, because we represent both sides. So what happens is I actually play the middleman and offer both sides limited representation, helping both of them come together. Okay? So I liked that. And then the other part is, what did you say, Jim? You said, oh, and I cannot share, I basically owe both sides those fiduciary responsibility, and confidentiality is really the most important one. I can't share anything about either party with the other side unless they give me written approval to do so. So that's the sticky part, right? Because we all get caught up in conversations and we're negotiating, and I say to Jim, go ahead and tell him that I'd be willing to go down to 200,000, unless, because I don't want him to walk. Jim goes and does that and comes back, we get a deal done, and now there's a problem later, and the seller says, I never told him to do that. He has no proof that I told him to do that. So if you have a client that says, you know what, you can go ahead and disclose this, say, please send me an email or shoot me a text or write me a letter or whatever that says that you're okay with me disclosing that information, and then I will forward that on, or I'll bring that to the other side, okay? But always get everything in writing, and I'm guilty of it too. We all act in the moment and time, and yep, he said this, and go forward, and it's great, like I said, when it all works out, but when it doesn't, and we're in front of a board, we better have our ducks in a row, right?
At the very minimum, document it. You talk to them on the phone on such and such a date,
Yes.
and they gave me the
Verbal okay.
verbal okay to do it.
Yeah.
Writing's the best.
I agree. We call it the old CYA, right? Make your notes, keep a note in every file that you do, a sheet of notes, and just update it with what's happened through the transaction, so that if, we don't remember everything, but if you had to go back, you can pull out your notes and say, oh yeah, back on May 10th, this is what you told me, and it'll refresh your memory too.
In an ethics hearing, the person that has the most written documents usually wins.
Yes, good. That's good to know. Okay, so the most important things about dual agency too, when you're talking with your buyer, is if we find ourselves in this dual agency situation, meaning both buyer and seller are represented by the same brokerage, that means I now have to take a limited representation role, not advocating for one side to the detriment of the other, and I need your written consent to do that. Okay?
There is one exception to that, and that's disclosing material facts. If the buyer tells you that there's a big leak in the basement, don't tell, you have to tell the other side.
Right,
No exception.
and that's not a confidentiality thing, that's a disclosure. So you owe that disclosure to both parties, so that's always in effect. And we never are off the hook as agents to not disclose, right? No matter what the situation is.
We've got one of those suits going right now, where
Okay.
the seller told their agent that there was water coming in the basement, and they didn't tell the buyer.
Mhm.
The seller signed the alternatives form. The seller's off the hook 100%. They don't have to disclose anything if everybody signed the alternatives form, but the agent has to,
Right.
if they know anything.
Yeah, I agree. And that's another thing I don't think agents really realize, right? That just because it's an as is or a seller's alternative or whatever, we still 100% are obligated to always disclose everything we know that may affect someone's use and enjoyment of a property. Okay? Okay, cool. So now we've gone over buyer representation, full representation, and then we talked about dual agency. And then the last thing we present on the agency is this notice of predatory offender information. So I'd like to hear, Kat, how do you bring that up when you're going over agency?
Usually I say this is my least favorite part to go over, but I have to go over it. And honestly, what I say is if you guys would like any information regarding predatory offenders, you can either go to this website or call this number.
Perfect. I love that. And the reason I love it, it doesn't go into a lot of detail. You aren't telling them to look up. You aren't saying you should, and when we find a house, you should probably go here. It's if you're interested, here's where you find the information, right? And that also goes beyond the scope. If you are, let's say at an open house and someone walks in and says, hey, do you know if there's any predatory offenders? Sometimes not knowing is the best, but you say, you know what, for all of that information, here's where you can find out. Go to the Department of Corrections. Okay, very good. Okay, any questions on agency? I will recommend you always carry copies of this. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. No, that's right. Always carry copies of this with you in your car, in your briefcase, when you go to your open house, because you never know when you're going to run into somebody and they start saying, hey, I was thinking of buying, and Sarah, I've known you for years. I'm thinking of buying a house, and here's how much I want to spend. And then you're like, hold on, love to chat with you. But now that you're starting to share all this confidential information, let's set up an appointment so that I always do that. Let's set up an appointment so that I can take good notes and I don't forget anything. And then that'll give me an opportunity to then when we have that appointment, we can sit down and go through the agency disclosure.
Do
Okay.
you have it attached to your email? I've seen a lot of agents who have that attachment to their email.
You can, I've seen that too, but that does not release you of your job to explain it.
Mhm.
It doesn't, you can hand somebody this all day long and you'll be busted in ethics hearing if you didn't explain it, okay? So that's our job, is to go over the paperwork.
We run into people that say, I'm not signing anything, just say, that's fine, you don't have to sign it, here's a copy of it, and write on another form that this person refused to sign it.
And we have run into that. They're like, I'd like to just read it. That's great. Again, CYA, go back to your notes in your file, presented it on this date. They wanted to take it home. They didn't feel like signing it, but you are covered, right? And then sometimes even going a step further, like whenever I have an appointment with somebody that night or the next morning, if it's early evening, I will send them hey, it was great to meet you. Per our conversation, you wanted to take that agency form home and read it. Please let me know if there's any questions, that you have. I wanted in writing documentation that I followed up to say, I'm happy to answer any questions, blah, blah, blah. Okay?
I let them out at open houses too on the counter.
I agree. I mean, this, and Jim will, again, back me up. When you have Michelle Smith down here and you talk to, you take some of these classes, they'll tell you, this is the first thing that if there's any case, they're going to go, let me see the copy of your agency or provide the copy of your agency, and they're going to look at when that was dated, right? And if that was dated the same day you wrote your offer, and not saying that those situations don't happen. I've had a couple in my day where the first time I've met with them, boom, boom, and we went out, we found a house, and we wrote an offer, and it was dated, right? Same date. Doesn't happen that's probably the 0.1% of the times, right? So just always do your job and present this first, and then go forward, right, to help them find a house, because we're specifically talking about buyers today. Okay, so a nice transition then, going from the agency disclosure. You say, great, any questions on the agency disclosure, Mr. Buyer? And they say no, and then you go, great. Well, let's go over the form that allows me to go to work for you, right? We want to be assumptive and we want to have those embedded commands. So this is the buyer representation contract that allows me to put my 25 plus years of experience to work and find you the house that you're looking for. Boom, right? So now we're going to go through the buyer's rep. Now I'm going to be naughty and say that I can guarantee you 99% of us don't don't go over this contract correctly with our buyers, okay? And so I'm really gonna be adamant that you explain this correctly. And I used to be one of those. I blow over, oh yeah, my job, my broker's obligation is we find you the house. Your obligation is to tell me what you want, let me know if anything changes so that I know what I'm looking for to help you find it, right? And then I'm moving on. You really read each one of these little paragraphs in here, you're gonna find out there's a lot more important information that these buyers need to know before they sign this contract. Because again, if we find ourselves in a hearing, they're gonna go, that's not what Kelly said. She just said I had to tell her if anything changes, you know, but that's not what these paragraphs say. Okay, so we're gonna start from the top. Obviously, on all your paperwork, I want dates on there. Jim wants dates, or the new broker's gonna want dates. They're gonna wanna know full name of the buyer and all buyers, right? So when you're having your buyer consultation, you're asking, are you the only person that's going to be purchasing this home, or will there be somebody else purchasing with you? And will they be on the paperwork with you, right? So we want to get those buyers on this contract. The broker is always Keller Williams Premier Realty, not Keller Williams, not KW, Keller Williams Premier Realty. Now, what I've done in the past is I put Keller Williams Premier Realty and then in parentheses KWPR, so that further on down I can just put KWPR if it's easier, but it's still referenced and it all makes sense in the same contract, okay? Okay, so the buyer is giving the broker exclusive right to locate and assist in negotiations for purchase. And so obviously you're gonna put the contract start date and then you're gonna have an expiration date. And those 2 points need to be on this contract for it to be a valid contract, right? We need an end date. And as far as I know, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, there is no time limit on this. You could have a 10-year buyer rep contract, right?
Sure.
So most people probably won't sign one that long, but you know, for my purposes, I joke about the fact that I'm getting older, you know, and I just say, hey, I'm just gonna be honest, I'm getting older. I don't wanna have to try to remember 15 different expiration dates with all my clients. Whenever I sign a contract, my expiration date is 12/31 of that year, goes to the end of that year. Now I know that's when they're all expiring in December. I'm doing a lot of renewals, you know, but it's just easier for me to remember. So whatever your system is, whatever, you have a start date and you have an end date, okay?
Would you set that same, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Such a small group. Would you set that same date if you were meeting with someone, say on November 12th?
Nope. Well, then what I'll do is I'll do it to the next year.
You'll say, I
Yeah.
knew.
And I joke, I'm like, well, I know the market's tough for buyers, you know, but my goal is that we find you a house certainly well before December of next year. But I just don't want to have to continue to do an extension and they go, yeah, not a problem.
Okay,
Okay?
nice, Kelly.
Yeah. And I mean, I joke about it. I mean, the whole thing is this should be fun for people, especially for buyers. I get sellers may feel a little bit more stress, you know, or maybe buyers in the under $200,000 range are feeling the stress. But this should be a really fun time. And if you're fun and you're confident, you're relaxed, that's how they're gonna feel, right? So like we talked about before you got here, Sarah, is that being confident and knowing this paperwork allows you to talk to them versus reading to them, right? And looking down. You can look at them, smile, you know, you're confident, comfortable, they're confident, comfortable. Okay?
Makes sense.
So I will tell you guys, this is a big thing for me. I say when you time block your week, you time block to lead generate. I'd say time block a half an hour to an hour, a couple times a week, or at least once a week, that you do paperwork, that you guys take a form and learn it and read it and write down, here's an easy way for me to explain this. This is what this means. Or if I don't know, ask somebody, get the definition of what that paragraph means and write down how you're going to explain it to a client. And that becomes your script for that form. Learn your little 1 or 2 liners for each paragraph as you go through. And I promise you, the better you get at your paperwork, the better you are going to be as an agent, hands down, right? Because anybody can talk to people, anybody can open a door, anybody can, you know, walk you through a house. Not everybody can explain paperwork correctly and make their clients feel comfortable, okay? So time block for that stuff. Okay, so now we've got our dates on the contract, and then you say to your buyer, my obligation as your broker is to make a reasonable effort to locate the property, you know, assist you throughout the transaction, you know, as needed, and act in your best interest at all times, okay? Comply with all the laws and regulations to get you a house. The big one is the next one, right? I can guarantee you, people are not taking time to explain this. And this to me is the essence of this contract. This is the whole reason why you are doing this. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, your obligation is to work exclusively with me as your broker, right? Don't you think that's a key point of this whole contract? Most people don't say that. They say your obligation is to tell me what you want, let me know if anything changes, don't buy anything big right now, because we don't, but they miss the whole point. You're agreeing to work exclusively with me. That does not mean that you can't look online or go to an open house, but what you need to do when you go do those things is to inform the agent working that open house that you're working with Kelly Domaille at, Keller Williams, okay? You're agreeing to work exclusively with me. You are also agreeing to provide me or furnish me with accurate financial information and an approval letter, validity that you can purchase, okay? So if you haven't done that, that's your next step. Go get pre-approved and, so we can start looking for a home. It also states that the buyer is legally obligated, once they sign a purchase agreement, to purchase that property. Other than if they're going to exercise any contingencies that you build in, okay? So if we write a purchase agreement and we've achieved the inspection and removed that inspection contingency, and we're pre-approved, we've done the appraisal, everything, and now it's a week before closing, right? All those contingencies are removed. They are legally obligated to purchase that property unless the seller does not perform on something that they're supposed to do, right? So if everybody is doing what they're supposed to do and buyer just decides now they're not going to buy that property, what do we typically do as agents? Okay, you're gonna lose your earnest money, sign cancellation, you lost your earnest, yeah, we know, we're sorry, we changed our mind, moving on. What we forget is that they are legally obligated, and per this, they shall pay us the compensation due in this contract. Guarantee you nobody goes over that with a buyer.
Have you ever had to enforce that?
I will tell you, we have had a couple situations where we actually could have, right? Most of us default to the position of, are we really gonna go to that point? Now, if you've worked a lot and you've busted your hump and you've put expenses into this and blah, 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 I think legally you have every right to do that, or at least ask for your expenses to be recouped, right? But it's really not you, it's the brokerage.
Oh,
It's the broker's money, and the broker is legally due the compensation per this contract, right?
There are other companies that do
Enforce that.
buyers too.
Yeah. As you should. You guys we as agents have to stop being afraid
Right.
of our paperwork, because we spend a lot of time and people waste our time. They use us for our knowledge and our expertise all the time, right? And then go buy somewhere else. I mean, we have to start protecting and valuing our profession, and then people will start to value us. But we allow them to devalue us, so stop doing that, right? And I think the first step in doing that is putting them on the hook. By signing this, you guys, I'm gonna do everything, everything in my power. I'm gonna spend time searching for properties. It might take us a while, but we're gonna be driving here and there looking for that house, and I'm gonna be giving you everything I got. In exchange, I just ask that you work exclusively with me, that once we find the house, you do know that barring any contingencies that we build in there to allow you to maybe change your mind and get out of the contract, when we're done with those, you're legally obligated to purchase that property. And if you just get cold feet and you change your mind, not only will you lose your earnest money, but the brokerage is due that compensation of my buyer's fee of 3%,
If you switch
okay?
agents in the middle of the stream while you're under contract, you're still due they are due Keller Williams if they buy another house with another agent.
Right, but that gets to the point later in this form. You're gonna explain it even further, right? There's on page 2, on line 47, it says, caution, your actions locating a property could basically put you at risk for paying some money. So if you decide to go to an open house and there's a great agent working that open house, and you decide you're gonna buy that home and they talk you into writing an offer, you're still gonna owe us commission. And you might owe them commission. So these are the things that are really important in this contract, so they understand. You don't wanna scare them, but you wanna say, here's the reality of it. You know, we're spending a lot of time, we don't get paid until somebody actually purchases and closes on a house. So a lot of time, energy, effort, money goes in upfront in hopes that we recoup that when we get paid at closing, right? So all I'm asking is that if I'm gonna put the time, energy, effort, and money into this, is that you agree to sign this contract to work exclusively with me so that I have the opportunity to recoup those expenses in the end, okay? And if not, and if you do write a purchase agreement, maybe with a for sale by owner or at an open house with another agent, you're still gonna be obligated to pay the commission to this brokerage. Does that make sense, Mr. Buyer? Yes, it does, right? Now, does that sound scary? Don't let your drunk monkey talk to you and tell you that, oh, if I say it that way, my buyer's never gonna sign this contract. My answer to that is, number one, if you're scared of it, they're gonna be scared of it. If they're not willing to sign it and they're devaluing your time, effort, money, whatever expertise, then maybe that's a client you don't want. And you have to not be attached to the outcome, because you only want to work with clients who will value you and where you're going to get paid in the end, right? I don't work for free. And I often use that when I'm explaining this, is the fact that because I don't get paid until you actually close and purchase something, this is why we need a contract. You work at Mayo, you get a paycheck. You don't need a contract per se, because you already have an employment contract with Mayo, that when you come to work and you punch in every 2 weeks or the 1st or the 15th or whatever on their payday, they're gonna get you a paycheck. You probably wouldn't go to Mayo and say, I'm gonna work for a couple months and I'm gonna hope that I get a paycheck, right? In essence, without this contract, that's what you're asking me to do, is to work for a couple months, find you a house, and hope that I get paid. I don't work that way. I got kids to feed. I got bills to pay too. So this is just kind of a mutual agreement that we're both gonna do what we need to do to find you the property, okay? So whatever your script is, whatever you feel comfortable saying to accurately tell them what they're obligating, or obligated to by signing this, I think that needs to be conveyed. And if you are not explaining that, then you are in default of your job, right? And you will get in trouble if something comes to a hearing, okay? So your obligations, buyer, to work exclusively with me, furnish your information, your financial information, get a pre-approval letter so I know that you have the ability to purchase. Obviously, if anything changes in your search criteria, let me know so that I can update my records and make sure that we're looking for the right properties. Once we do find a house, we write a purchase agreement. We've removed any contingencies or protection points that we've built into the purchase agreement for you. You are legally obligated to purchase that property, assuming the seller does everything that they're requested to do. And if you don't, you will owe this brokerage my buyer's agent fee, or that commission due. Okay? Any questions, Mr. Buyer? Great, let's move on. So in terms of the compensation, as we talked about, I charge, and you're gonna go through what you charge. Some people charge retainer fees, some people don't. Some people charge 3%, some people may charge more or less. Whatever you charge, you're gonna fill out the next section, okay? And you're going to explain to them, here's the compensation, my compensation package or my compensation program, okay? I don't get paid until you close, and here's what I get paid. If this contract expires and we haven't found a home, which I'm very confident we will, right? You're gonna say, I have the utmost confidence we're gonna find you something. But if it expires and we haven't found a home, and you decide that you're going to change directions, maybe you're just not interested in buying anymore, or you're going to take a little rest, a little breather, I, within 72 hours of the expiration date, am going to provide you with a list of all the homes that I took you through. Just in case you decide to change your mind and you want to proceed with buying one of those properties. If that's the case, what this is saying is that list is protected for, and you can put a maximum of 180 days in line 34, and I would highly encourage you to write the maximum in. That list is gonna be provided, or is gonna be protected for 180 days. In case you change your mind and then do decide to wanna purchase one of those, you'll still allow me to represent you. Okay? The only time that you can rip that list up and it doesn't matter within that 6 months is if you decide to hire a different brokerage to represent you in your pursuit of a home. Okay, then all bets are off and that list you can just throw in the garbage. But until you do that, or until you renew the contract with me, then that list is protected. Okay? Any questions on that part? Okay. So, Kat, is that how you explain that?
No, it's not, and I really like that a lot more.
Okay,
So
okay.
that's good.
I have noticed in just training my buyer's agents over the years that they don't explain it
That's
that
my
way either.
least favorite part to go over.
And that's, to me, the easiest.
I think so too.
You know, here's the deal, because again, I don't get paid till you
Yeah.
close, and I've put all this time into showing you these properties, that list is just basically protected unless you hire somebody else. If not, you just change your mind and say, you know what, I really did like that house, I'd like to purchase it now. Then just you're gonna be allowing me to represent you.
But that's such a perfect, a lot better example than how I was taught, so that's good.
Okay.
There's one other thing that I add is upon the expiration of this, we have two options. First option is we can extend it.
Yep.
We can extend it, or the
Right.
180 days.
Well,
and
I'm hoping that you're extending it or attempting to extend it prior to its expiration.
Oh,
So,
definitely.
yeah. Okay, so good. So I want you guys to really learn what that little thing is. Because again, don't you think that's kind of one of those situations where that could be a little sticky later?
Mhm.
And how many of us are following up with those buyers if they've let the thing expire and you weren't able to extend it? Are you staying in contact with them? Hey guys, how is it? Have you thought about it? Do you want to keep looking? You want to get back on the horse here and give it another run? A lot of us forget about that, unfortunately, right? And the next thing we know, if we forget about them, they probably are signing with somebody else. So don't forget those buyers, even though it may expire and they don't renew at that time. Find out why they aren't renewing. And if it's not having to do with customer service or you personally, stay in touch with them and try to continue to get them to rewrite or re-sign with you.
So then on line 41,
Yep.
you would check,
Well, it's,
any compensation accepted by broker, seller.
Yeah.
Or broker.
so
representing or
So I really actually wish that this was written differently, because I wish this little line was up here, but if you really read this, it says, starting on line 25, if the buyer or any person acting on the buyer's behalf agrees to purchase any property during the term of this contract, the following compensation will apply. And it talks about number one, do you charge a retainer fee? Do you charge a certain percent of the selling price or a flat fee, right? You're gonna fill in how you get compensated. A, on line 32, buyer purchases or agrees to purchase a property before the expiration date of this contract, even if the buyer does not use the broker's services or within 180 days of the expiration date. So they owe you the compensation if they buy a property during the term of this contract or within 180 days after the expiration date, assuming they haven't entered into another contract with somebody else. So it's explaining to them, and then it goes a step further to say, if you've checked shall, the broker assisting or representing the seller or the seller shall reduce your obligation, Mr. Buyer, to pay that fee to me if they've agreed to do so, right? It can reduce your obligation. We're not saying you're off the hook. We're saying I charge 3% to represent you. If we buy a house and in the MLS, I see, or not in the MLS, if the seller agrees to pay my fee, great, you owe nothing, right? If I charge 3%, Sarah, and the seller's only willing to pay 2.5%, you just need to know that you would just, part of your closing cost would be that additional 0.5%, okay? So the seller may offset your obligation, but you may be making up the difference depending on what the seller's willing to pay. And in our area, it's pretty typical that most sellers pay 3%. So rarely will that happen, but I will let you know if we find ourselves in one of those situations. I never let people off. I mean, I get everyone can run their business the way they want. There's some agents that say, I'm only gonna collect what's being offered in the MLS, and that's it, right? I'm not gonna charge that back to my seller. And there are cases where I know my buyer might be really tight. But there are ways to work around this, you guys. So let's say, I don't mean to get off on a tangent here, but let's say you have a buyer and we're buying a house and the seller's only gonna pay 2.5%, right? And I charge 3%. Can I ask for the seller to pay 0.5% in closing costs? And that would cover that, wouldn't it? So let's say your buyer doesn't need the closing costs. They weren't gonna ask for any, but now we find out that the commission is not gonna cover the 3%. Could we now ask the seller to pay an additional 5%?
As long as we explain
Towards
that to
closing
the
costs.
buyer, because we're doing the contract on their behalf.
What do you mean by that?
The buyer has to be in agreement to that. We have to make sure that the buyer dictates that almost. Because this contract is their contract with the seller.
This contract is
Their
their
purchase agreement, the purchase agreement.
Correct.
We include that in the purchase agreement. That purchase agreement is not a contract between realtor and realtor. That's a
Well,
purchase-
I think what you're
broker.
saying is, we're not writing in the purchase agreement that the seller's paying 0.5% of the agent commission.
We're doing it in this closing.
We're saying it's closing costs, because the closing costs to that buyer now, they have 0.5% more
Yeah.
as their closing costs. So we're calling it closing costs, but they know part of the cost that they pay is a brokerage commission. Right. So
Let them know that.
never put in the purchase agreement commissions.
No,
Never do that, because that has nothing to do with buyer and seller.
Right.
That has between brokerage to brokerage, right?
so, the purchase
You'll see
agreement
it
where
on
it
a
says
lot
where the
for
closing
sale by
cost
owners.
is.
But that's different. That's different, because the for sale by owner does not have a public offer to cooperate. So you generally, here's the other thing, with a for sale by owner, you do not put that in the purchase agreement. What you should do is fill out a one-time showing contract.
If they won't fill
with-
that out, then that's your last
Where the
recourse.
shall is.
Right, but there are forms, again, knowing your forms is crucial, right? Because there are proper forms to have signed between a for sale by owner and you. One-time showing contract, there's their promise to pay the commission, so you don't have to put it in the purchase agreement. Again, purchase agreement is between buyer and seller. Brokerage agreements or listing agreements or whatever, that's between seller and brokerage, and then broker to broker, okay?
Have you ever seen where somebody checks shall not? I've never seen that. Have you seen that? And why would you do that?
Make sure you get all your money. Your full
Well-
5% of your full commission. I had a lawyer
There
contest
are-
that once, where it was check shall reduce,
Mhm.
and this doctor right in front of me it was my sale. He said to the sellers, don't pay that $350 thing, don't pay it.
Well, that's a transaction
Well, that's
commission,
different.
that's
Yeah, but
different than
still, it
this,
says
yep.
And he went over this line, he said, any compensation received shall reduce. I said, yeah, it says reduce, it doesn't say replace.
Right.
It says reduce. I got in a mini argument with him, I didn't wanna get in front of my clients and tell her at their attorney,
Yeah, and you know what, it's funny, because I remember this question coming up and somebody had a really good example, and I can't think of it, I'm racking my brain right now trying to think of why they would do that, but if I remember it, and I will find out, and I will send you guys an email if I can remember that, it made perfect sense. I was like, oh, I could see that. Probably not a situation we're gonna run into very often, but it made sense to me. I will find an example for you. But yes, there may be an opportunity or a situation where you may want to do that. And that way,
Would it be like a for sale by owner situation? or not?
No, because this is, it's just saying shall, it's not saying, it's just saying it might, right? Shall is like, it may, it might not,
Uh-huh.
it may.
Okay.
So for sale by owner, if they're willing to pay for it, great. So you want to say shall, because if for sale by owner, shall offset your obligation. But
Here's
it may be more commercial related, I don't know, I can't remember what the example was, but I'll find it for you.
I saw, a buyer representation contract where it was written that the compensation was gonna be 0%.
Mhm.
And then I can see, the shall not, obviously.
Right.
But then the broker to broker relationship is 3%.
I had people in the past, years ago, saying, well, if you put a zero in there, you aren't entitled to anything.
Right, exactly.
So
Right,
you put
and that's
three
what I was
percent
like-
in there. or you
Well,
can
I did
put-
have one client, I want you to put a zero there and I'll decide, if it was worth it, when we find something nice. I said,
What did you say to that?
I just said, you know what, I think we're gonna just have to agree to stay friends and part ways,
Yeah.
because I said that, I did my whole thing, I don't, he worked at Mayo, and I just said, that would be like you going to Mayo and working, and them saying, at the end of 2 months, I'll decide, yeah, if I'm gonna pay you or not. I said, would you accept that? And he didn't say anything, he just looked at me kind of with this blank stare, and I said, yeah, I didn't think so. I said, so I don't work for free either.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we digress. So yeah, so line 41 is, are you gonna check shall, are you gonna check shall not? Meaning whatever the seller is willing to pay, will that offset the obligation for the buyer? But I really think it's important that you're making your buyer feel that they're committing here. They're not just off the hook and they're gonna like, this is loosey-goosey, this doesn't mean anything. This is a contract, and you want them to feel committed to that.
I like that.
Okay? Okay, so page 2, up at the top, again, buyer understands that buyer does not have to pay broker compensation. That's where they talk about if they go under a contract with another, if this expires and now they've re-entered into a contract with somebody else, now they're off the hook to pay the obligation, or the obligation to pay the contract commission here, okay? Line 47, this is right here, this is the big one, that supports what we talked about earlier. So your actions, Mr. Buyer, can affect, what you have to pay, or the fact that you may actually have to pay something out of your pocket, right? So, and it actually gives the example, the act of going through an open house unaccompanied by a buyer's broker or licensee representing you, or signing a purchase agreement through another broker or a for sale by owner, right? This may require the buyer payment of full compensation of our brokerage fee. So again, feel free to go to the open house. It's good. Just as soon as you walk in, you just tell them, hey, I'm working with Kelly at Domaille Real Estate. Look online all you want. You find something, you're driving by, you see a for sale by owner, call me. Take down the phone number that's on the sign. Call me. Let me call them so I can try to negotiate your fee in there so it doesn't come out of your pocket, and we'll get you in there. And I always tell people, commission is never, I'm just going to let you know, this fee is never going to come in between me finding you your house. We're going to do everything we can, and I promise you this will not come in, but you need to know the obligations of this contract, and we're going to try our best to get it all negotiated in so you don't have to come up with it out of your pocket. Okay? So 53, the general nature of this property. What is the nature of this buyer? What are they buying? Investment property, personal property, farm, whatever, recreation. You want to check the appropriate or applicable boxes. The next section, can we require where people close? If you have your best friend works at Rochester Title and you guys have this agreement, I'm gonna send as much stuff to you as I can. Can I say, Sarah, you know what, you're gonna be closing at Rochester Title. I'm gonna write that down, right? How do you, when you meet with a buyer, Sarah, how do you present this section? Let's role play.
Oh, thank you for putting me on the spot.
Sure.
Well, I'm still so new to this that I'm basically reading.
Okay.
I'm reading it.
Okay, that's fair, that's fair. Jim, let's
Word
role
for
play this.
word.
What do you say when you get to this point of the
I said
contract?
that, we can close anywhere you prefer to. If you have a title company you'd rather go to, or an attorney you'd rather go to, that's fine. But we do have a closing company within our office that makes it really easy for me when they walk right down the hall and see how things are progressing. by the way, she's an awesome closer too.
Mhm.
And then 99 times out of 100 allow me to arrange for closing.
So do you think, just right there, that was, to me, that felt like a very leading statement? So you being on the ethics board, do you think that if that came down to then the client said, well, Jim said, this is the title company that's super convenient and easy right down the hallway. Do you think that, I mean, I'm not asking you because you are on that board. Do you think
Well,
that's
I
leading in
suppose
any way?
technically it might be bending it a little bit.
Okay.
I'm gonna bend them any way I can.
Yeah, I would just say be careful,
Yeah.
okay? And
Well,
it's,
I ask them if they have a title company they'd like to close at.
Yeah.
And if they say no, I'll say, well, we have one in our office, not one with Spiel.
right, if they say no, who do you recommend? Now they've asked you, who do you recommend? Here's who I recommend and here's why, right?
That's the way it usually
They're right here,
works.
it's very convenient, it's easy, she's great, she's been doing it for 30 years, you know,
First
great.
thing they mentioned, like Holy Law or Rochester Title, I write that and said, oh,
Yeah.
we will close there.
And that's how I do it too. I say, okay, you guys, we've now found the house, right? We get to go to closing. We have to choose who closes the transaction for us. And you can use a real estate attorney or you can use a title company. Do you have a preference or have you worked with a company in the past that you would like to use? Right? Now it's them saying, well, last time I used Oli Law, and I say, great. Did you have a good experience and would you like to use them again? Yeah, that's fine, great. And then so in this margin, this is what I do, you can do whatever you want. But in this margin, I say, okay, great, I'm gonna write Oli Law over here to the side because by the time we find it, a house could be a month from now and I'm not gonna remember. So I'll be able to pull this out, I'll remember. And then I say, when the time comes, would you like me to schedule the closing based on your schedule and your availability and provide all of the documentation to the closing company on your behalf? Or would you like to do that? And most of the time they go, oh, you can do it. I go, great, because that's what I'm getting paid to do. So, I'll do that. And I check, right? But they get the opportunity to do that. Maybe their brother's a real estate attorney and I'll get it all to him. He's good. I'll set it up. Don't worry about it. So it's, again, all this paperwork is what your client wants, not what you want, not what you typically do. It's what would you like me to do? Or what would you like this to say or be checked, right? Other than our commission. Okay, so we never recommend, or we never tell them where to close. We ask them where to close, and then we ask them if they want us to arrange all of that or if they want to do that, okay? And then they have to initial. And then line 68, again, Mr. Buyer, I've discussed the brokerage fees, but you just need to know that there may be additional fees involved with purchasing a home. And since you've already talked to ABC lender and they gave you a loan estimate, you're probably aware of the closing costs when you do financing, and they shake their head, or if they haven't been pre-approved, you're gonna say, when you go in and you talk to your lender, they're going to give you what's called a loan estimate, and that will give you all of their lender fees and closing company fees that are related to purchasing a home, okay? In addition to that, there may be a few other fees. If you choose to have a home inspection or a radon inspection, those are some additional monies that will be, required up front as well, okay? Next section, foreign investment in real property tax act. Deb, how do you explain that to your clients?
I don't.
Okay,
Well, and the reason I don't is it never comes into play.
what do you mean?
Um,
How do you know you're meeting with me and a
Yeah,
buyer? How do you
yeah.
know it doesn't come into play?
yeah, yeah. Um,
So what it is, in a nutshell, is if you are a foreign individual, citizen of another country, and you own property here in Minnesota, now you go sell it. There's certain taxes that are due to the government when you sell a property. The government wants to make sure they get their money, right? Of course they do. Where this is important when you're meeting with buyers and how it relates to buyers is, Mr. Buyer, we want to make sure we're aware that if the home you're buying is being sold by a not US citizen or a foreign individual, we need to know that because we need to make sure that those taxes are paid. Otherwise, the obligation becomes yours as the new owner of that property, and you will have to pay that tax, okay? So the title company will do their due diligence It is on sellers' disclosures when we find properties, and we'll be able to look at the disclosures of the property. That seller will indicate if they are a foreign individual. And if they are, I will notify the title company of that. And they will do their best, obviously, to get everything in place to collect those taxes at closing before any other proceeds go to the seller. That way you, Mr. Buyer, will not be paying that tax, okay? So that's why it's very important that they know this, okay? Because if you didn't know that and you didn't tell them, and all of a sudden at closing they go, well, what's this 15% tax? Or they get socked with a bill a month after they've closed, right? And they're going, what is this? Well, I guess I didn't realize that the seller of the house you bought was a foreign individual, right? So again, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, there's the FIRPTA, the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. We want to make sure that any house that you buy is, if it's being sold by a foreign individual, not a US citizen, that the title company is aware of that, and that they collect the taxes that are due upon that sale. Otherwise, it would by default come to you. So we'll do our best to obviously get that information, or have the title
And
company
that
get that
comes up
information.
again in the purchase
I was just gonna
agreement.
say,
It does,
that's
yeah.
part of the purchase agreement.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in the listing agreement and in the disclosures. So I mean, it's out there, right? But we can only do what's written. We can't help if people lie, so that's a problem,
This
right?
covers your butt, basically.
But all you're doing is saying, well, in the disclosures, and I hope when you guys are working with buyers and you are writing offers with buyers, you are looking through the disclosures with them, or you've looked through them and they've looked through them, and you say, do you have any questions? Or, hey, I noticed that they checked the box, that says they are a foreign individual. I want to just let you know that I have noticed that, and that I have brought that to the attention of the title company. They're gonna make sure that they do what they need to do to collect any taxes that are due upon sale, okay? Build value, like these are like nuggets of gold that we are building value into what we do, right? This is why I'm getting paid the big bucks, right? I know what I'm talking about here. I'm not an attorney, but I know what to look for to make sure I'm representing you, and that we are doing the best to make sure that this is an awesome transaction and you are happy when it's all done, okay? The next part, line 78. We always recommend, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, that you have a home inspection. Now, what that means, and I'm sure this is where it ends, right? Most agents go, I recommend that you have a home inspection when we find a house, and there are warranty programs that you can buy that will warrant the mechanicals and the appliances for the first year, and then they move on, right? A good thing to note and to explain when we get to this part is, you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, it's important that you get to satisfy you as to who inspects the property. I always recommend just having another set of eyes, or just even another look at the property, because we're in the heat of the moment and we love it, and oh my gosh, maybe it was multiple offer situation, we felt we had to just write something quick. Having that just time to really look again, whether you do it or maybe your uncle's a contractor and you want him to come look at it, or you hire a home inspector to come do that, it is what I recommend, so that you get a full look at what you are buying, right? It gives you an opportunity to find out if there are major issues, high ticket items, or safety concerns that we could, easily ask the seller to remedy prior to you moving in. That's your opportunity, okay? Now, in addition to that, when we find a property, part of the purchase agreement is going to ask you if you're interested in having a home warranty as part of the offer. Now, you can buy one. You can ask the seller to pay for one for you, or you can say, I'm not interested at all in a home warranty. These home warranty programs are basically insurance policies, and what they do is they warrant the mechanical systems of your home and the appliances for the first year that you would own the property, okay? Now, like any other insurance policy, there's a lot of fine print, and it doesn't mean that every single thing is covered. So you just need to be aware. But what would happen is, let's say you bought the home, you moved in, your washing machine is not working right. You would contact the home warranty company. They might have depending on who you go with, they may have preferred vendors that you have to use, or they may tell you you can call anybody. But your responsibility under a home warranty program is that you will pay the service call fee, generally maybe around $100. And if they can repair it, they'll repair it at no cost. If they can't repair it, they'll replace it at no cost as long as the item is covered, meets all the criteria for coverage. Okay, so that's what a home warranty program is. And then you're moving on to the next, right? So I think a lot of people just are not explaining this stuff. So buyers are like totally, when you get to the purchase agreement, you're like, do you want a home warranty program? And they're like, what? What is that? If you've gone through this, you can go, remember when we talked about you can buy those home warranty programs that protect, they're gonna go, yeah. So do you want that, do you want that as part of the purchase agreement? And if so, who do you want to pay for that, right? It makes your job later so much easier if you do your homework up front, okay? The next page, we talk about dual agency. Remember we talked about that in the agency form that we were discussing earlier? Are you okay if you find yourself in a dual agency situation? If they say yes, great, this is where I need your written consent, because I've told them I need their written consent, right? Now it's expectation was set, and now they're like, yep, exactly what she said, I need the written consent. So this is where they would sign. If they do not want it, they would sign, I will not agree. At that moment, you just need to tell them, that's fine, totally get it. I just need to let you know that I cannot bring you into any property that is listed by Keller Williams because I'm putting you in a dual agency situation. It's not just if you want to buy the property, it's I cannot put you in a dual agency situation, okay? So you just need to know that. And if they're okay with it, then you move on. You don't belabor it. You don't make them feel guilty about their choices. You just tell them the pros and the cons of their decisions, right? Still their choice. Okay, so they sign there and check the box that's related. Line 101, there are other potential buyers out there, Mr. Buyer, that are looking in the same price range, shopping for the same houses you're going to be shopping for. And they may also be represented by our brokerage. So you're consenting to the fact that you're aware of that and you're okay with that, okay? I might actually be physically working with some of those myself, okay? Line 104 through 107, previous agency relationships. So Mr. Buyer, when we're out showing houses, we might end up going into a house that at one point in time, I actually had that seller under contract, okay? I still can tell you all the material facts about the property, the neighborhood that might affect your use and enjoyment of this property, but I still owe them the fiduciary responsibility of confidentiality. I can never divulge their confidential information to anybody for life, just like I can't divulge any of your confidential information for life, okay? Termination of the fiduciary responsibilities that I owe you. The termination happens when you actually find a house and we close, except for confidentiality. We just said I owe that to you for life, okay? So, or upon the expiration of this contract. So it's either this buyer rep contract expires or we purchase a home. All of those duties are done except for confidentiality. Okay? Any questions on that, you guys? Okay. And then notice of predatory offender. Again, we talked about that, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer in the agency. Again, if you're interested in any of that information or, where they may be, you can certainly go to the Department of Corrections website. Electronic signatures are acceptable in the state of Minnesota. So even though we are signing this in person today, as we proceed through the purchase transaction, we may have a situation where we have to send you something on, via email and get your electronic signature. Are you okay with it? Okay, great. And then you want to make sure you got accurate emails, right? And then consent for communication. By signing this, you're giving me the okay to contact you, whether it's phone, text, email, whatever, to get what I need throughout the transaction. Okay. And then you have a section 120 through 127 where you can write in any other provisions to this contract, right? I've had situations where a buyer rep says, I only want you to represent me if I'm buying in Minnesota or if I'm buying in Rochester. I also buy up in the cities and I have a realtor that works for me up there. So then I might put in here, this applies to Southeastern Minnesota or Rochester and Byron properties only or whatever, right? It could be anything. It could be, this is in regards to this property alone. Maybe they meet you and they go, oh my gosh, I found a house, I want to write an offer on it. Well, you still have to put this in place, right? So you have to sign the buyer rep and then you can write the purchase agreement. So they might say, I only really want you to represent me on this purchase. Okay, so then you would write that in there, right? Whatever that's your spot for whatever, okay? And then obviously we sign, and the big thing is you guys, make sure you're always getting all of this information filled out, email, phone number, address. Because if, God forbid, something were to happen to you or you're unavailable and something happens and we need to get a hold of your client, this is in dot loop, we pull it up, we have their contact information and we can get a hold of them, okay? And then the last thing, because I'm going over my time here, is the wire fraud alert. This is in very different spots all over as we proceed, but obviously you want to make sure that you're telling your buyers, you know, if anybody sends you a request to send personal information via email, don't do it unless you call to verify first that it's a legitimate email. Typically, anything that requires personal information or account numbers would be an encrypted email. So if it's not, and your little red flags are going up, odds are it's probably not legit, but give us a call and we'll track it down and find out if it's real or not. Okay?
It's not,
Pardon me?
and it's not numbered.
What do you mean by not
A
numbered?
lot of people put their 7 pages in the
Oh.
fire app. This is not,
That's not a number.
unless you put page 7 on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's attached as part of it now?
it's just attached.
Right, but I mean, I would say it should be part of it. That way we know, because it's a required form
It's required
for
form.
us, but not a
Separate
state
from
form.
the,
Well, I shouldn't say that. It's a state form. Yes, ma'am.
Question. Okay, so I do have a particular situation where I've got, I don't have anybody under contract, but they told me that they're hoping to find a place in Red Wing. But they're also willing to entertain Rochester.
Okay,
And I myself know, I don't know enough about the Red Wing market
sure.
to try to sell them on me being an agent for the whole southeastern Minnesota.
Right.
And they've been working with someone, but they haven't signed a contract.
Okay.
So when I meet with them, are you saying I could use this contract and in the other section say that this is just specific to Rochester properties?
Correct,
And so they could actually have 2 of these going,
correct,
one with Red Wing agent and one with me.
correct. However,
Okay.
what I would instruct them to do is I would say, hey, this is for Rochester only.
Uh-huh.
If you're going to enter into a contract with somebody in Red Wing,
Make sure
that they're writing that this is
specifies.
Red Wing only, or, you know, their area. But because you don't wanna be doing all this work and then they go, oh, sorry, you already have a contract with me, right?
Yes.
I would probably think it wouldn't hurt to even get a copy of that, so that you have that for your benefit, so you're not crossing any
Well,
compliance issues.
and-
with that other
And you give
agent.
them a contract, a copy, which you're gonna do anyway, right? That's the other thing, is we always have to deliver copies of the signed paperwork immediately to our clients. And give them an extra copy and say, here, this one's for you, this one is for the other agent that you may decide to work with. And if they've been working with somebody, do they love them? Do they not love them? Can you make a referral to like Wayne Gadiant who works up there, or?
Well, they feel kind of obligated.
Okay.
Because she's done a lot of legwork for
Sure.
them.
Okay.
Already, so
Yeah,
they've told me that they feel obligated and I'd rather not
perfect.
push them away from, from this Rochester deal.
Yeah,
Because they
absolutely.
have told me they really appreciate me.
Yeah,
So I'd rather not like say all or nothing. And
Right.
I wasn't quite sure how
Totally
to do
agree.
that, so now I
so
learned.
the other thing
today.
is maybe find out that, maybe you already know, but if you know the other agent's name and number, just say, you know what, I'm happy to just send them a copy of this
Yes,
and reach out to them and let them know that this is strictly for Rochester. If you decide to buy up there, you know, my hands are off. And then when you call that agent, you could just say, hey, I'm not stepping on toes at all. I just want to be very transparent and let you know that I've entered into a contract with a buyer's rep contract for these people, but it's specifically only to the Rochester area. They said that they've been working with you in Red Wing, so, you know, feel free to do a buyer rep contract with them specifically to Red Wing.
okay,
I would just be very upfront.
yeah,
Now, if they get all huffy puffy, then I think I would just let your client know that. Hey, I just want to let you know I shared this with them. They didn't seem too happy, but I thought I was doing a win-win here, but maybe you can have a conversation with them and explain to them why why we're doing it this way.
gotcha. Boy, that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, any other questions, you guys?
Oh, this is extremely helpful.
Good.
Yeah,
Yeehaw. Well, good. If you have any questions, let me know on anything, anytime, any paperwork, whatever.
this
Honestly,
gosh.
please time block to learn your paperwork. Please, please, please. Please.
I think at something where you put the nail on the head. I think that's where we need to do it more of as an onboarding thing,
Yeah,
because I think the paperwork is the most
Oh,
important
we've
thing.
done this, trust me, I'm gonna hit off.
yeah, hit off before you say